All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good afternoon from Malaysia. Thank you so much for participating in this LALE publication workshop, which is organized by the Department of Language and Literacy Education, Faculty of Education, Universiti Malaya. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Dr. Zhang as our speaker for the workshop entitled Publishing Research in Reputable International Journals, Editor, Reviewer, and Author Perspectives. So I would like to welcome Prof. Zhang to this online workshop. Okay, before I introduce our amazing speaker today, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Adlina Asmawi, the Head of Department of Language and Literacy Education, Faculty of Education, University of Malaya, to say a few words. Doctor?
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatiha. A warm welcome to Prof. Zhang and all the participants to the LALE publication workshop. We're delighted here to have Prof. Zhang with us, and it's 7 o'clock on a Saturday, and he's willing to do this, so we are delighted and most thankful. And we hope that everybody will get some insights from this, and we know you will. All right, so enjoy yourself. Thank you, Dr. Fatiha.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adele. So for your information, today's session will be divided into 40-minute workshop by Prof. Zhang and 15 minutes of Q&A session. So for the participants, we would appreciate it if you could ensure to mute your mic throughout the workshop. Okay, if you have any question, you can ask during the Q&A session later. Okay, now let me read the stellar biography of our speaker, Professor Dr. Zhang. Okay, Dr. Lawrence Jun Zhang is Professor of Applied Linguistics and Associate Dean, Faculty of Education and Social Work, University of Auckland, New Zealand. So his teaching mainly involved supervising 18 full-time PhD students in education, specifically in applied linguistics and TESOL, and delivering courses in systemic functional linguistics in language education. His major interests are in learner metacognition and teacher education, with particular reference to EFL reading, writing, and ESP/EAP. Additionally, he is also keen to examine issues related to writing for publication. He has published extensively along these lines in leading SSCI Index international journals, including Applied Linguistics Review, Assessing Writing, TESOL Quarterly, System, British Journal of Educational Psychology, Discourse Processes, Language Teaching Research, Modern Language Journal, Language Awareness, Language and Education, Journal of Second Language Writing, Reading and Writing Quarterly, English Today, Instructional Science, Metacognition and Learning, International Journal of Bilingualism and Bilingual Education, Journal of Psycholinguistic Research, English for Academic Purposes, Asia Pacific Education Researcher, Asia Pacific Journal of Education, Language, Culture and Curriculum, RELC Journal, Frontier in Psychology, Sustainability, as well as in International Journal of such repute such as Australian Review of Applied Linguistics, Australian Journal of Teacher Education, New Zealand Studies in Applied Linguistics, and Chinese Journal of Applied Linguistics. Okay. His co-edited books include Asian Englishes, Changing Perspectives in a Globalized World in 2012, published by Pearson Education USA, Language Teacher and Teaching, Global Perspective Local Initiative, published in 2014 by Routledge UK, and Crossing Borders, Writing Text Being Evaluated, Cultural and Interdisciplinary Norms in Academic Writing, published in 2021 by Multilingual Matters UK. He's also a popular plenary and keynote speaker at over 20 conferences around the world, particularly in Asia. A frequent presenter at major international conferences such as the TESOL Convention, the AAAL Conference, and the ILA Congress. He was the sole winner of the Distinguished Research in TESOL Award in 2011 for his article, A Dynamic Metacognitive Systems Perspective on Chinese University EFL Readers, published in TESOL Quarterly in 2010. He is principal investigator of a research project with huge research grant from the Singapore Ministry of Education. He is a key collaborator of 3 research grants from the China Social Science Fund and 1 huge research grant from the Millennium Foundation Singapore. He's also a former co-editor of brief research reports of TESOL Quarterly, current co-editor-in-chief of System, and associate editor for Frontier in Psychology. He's also a current editorial board member of Applied Linguistic Review, Journals of Second Language Writing, Metacognition and Learning, LALE Journal, Chinese Journal of Applied Linguistics, Australian Review of Applied Linguistics, and Iranian Journals of Language Teaching Research. He is a member of the American Association of Applied Linguistics and the TESOL International Association, and is the past secretary of the Singapore Association for Applied Linguistics and the Applied Linguistics Association of New Zealand. He has worked as chair of TESOL's and an EST interest section. He was honored with the recognition by the TESOL International Association, USA, with the award of 50 at 50, which acknowledged 50 outstanding leaders around the globe in the profession of TESOL when the TESOL Association celebrated its 50th anniversary in Baltimore. In November 2016, he was successfully elected to the International TESOL Association's Board of Directors. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Lawrence Zhang to deliver his workshop. Prof.
Oh, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, which is a bit long, but I thought the audience would be feeling, this man is doing so much. Maybe he's aging too fast. But I'll try to amuse you all with what I've done so far, so that I think what I'm going to offer as my personal insight into issues of international publishing might be useful to many of you. So now, without further ado, let me share the screen. And then, of course, before I go on with my presentation, I'd like to thank the University of Malaya Department of Language and Literacy Education, particularly the Associate Dean, Associate Professor Adelina, who spent so much time communicating with me. Of course, the whole university as my inviter is much appreciated as well. So I have thought that this is a topic that I've talked quite a bit, but most of the times when I'm giving this presentation, I gave similar presentations to quite different varieties of audiences, including Thai TESOL. Last year, I was invited to give a plenary to Thai TESOL's members on international publishing, but I focused on Thai contexts. This year, when I got the invitation, I thought for a while, then started working on my slides, trying to tailor to the needs of my colleagues in Malaysia, because I know much about Malaysia. As some of you may not have known, I worked at NIE, the National Institute of Education in Singapore of the Nanyang Technological University for over 10 years. So I spent 17 years at the National Institute of Education, and I started my postgraduate study in that institution. And after graduation, I got employment at the same institution until I got tenured to be an associate professor. But in 2011, I decided to leave the institution to go to New Zealand to get employment, and I was lucky to have been given the job, which is now I'm doing. So I tailored my presentation to publishing research in reputable international journals. The reason why I wanted to talk about reputable journals is related to many of the discussions in the various cyberspaces, including Facebook discussions, Messenger, WhatsApp, about what would be the journal that you would think is a reputable journal. So I'm going to offer my insight into that definition of what is called a reputable journal from an author, a reviewer, and also an editor point of view. As you can see from here, I'm the current co-editor-in-chief of the journal System, the tier 1, which is, the ranking of journals is divided into 4 quartiles. The first 25% is quartile 1, which is commonly known as Q1. The next 25% is Q2. The third 25% is Q3. The bottom of the quartile is Q4. But it means that the first 100 titles of the SSCI journals would be highly regarded as extremely reputable. But then how about other journals that do not belong to the SSCI? So I'm going to look into these issues so that some of the younger colleagues, including masters and doctoral students who are wondering where to get their work published, might be getting a better idea about their future plans. Now, first, very quickly, for those of you who have never been to New Zealand, I'm in Auckland. Auckland is on North Island, and New Zealand is divided mainly into two major islands, the North Island and the South Island. I'm on the North Island, and Wellington is at the southern tip of the North Island. So this is the geography. If some of you are thinking about how big New Zealand is, actually New Zealand is relatively small. If you look at Australia, Australia is so big and New Zealand is very small. New Zealand is the size of the UK or roughly about Japan. So, but in terms of population, New Zealand is far smaller than the UK or Japan. But geographically, it's relatively isolated, as you can see, although it's connected internationally by flights around the world. This is one of the beautiful scenery spots of New Zealand. If you come to New Zealand one of the days when the borders open, you will see many such sceneries. But of course, Malaysia itself is beautiful. So it's a very different scenery that you're going to see if you come to New Zealand. This is one of the beaches in North Island, and you know, not very far from Auckland. And this is the university I'm currently working at. This is not publicity, but I just want to say that New Zealand is proud to be ranked #1 in the international university rankings in terms of impact by Times Higher Education ranking system. Now come to the topic about which are reputable journals. I know too much about Asia. I know too much about aspirations from Asian universities, including University of Malaya. Everyone is talking about journal publications, where the journals should be, what journals that we should publish our papers in. Most often, the so-called reputable journals are linked to the indexing systems. So the indexing systems for sciences, for natural sciences, it's SCIE. It's Science Citation Index Expanded. This is the highest reputable, most prestigious ranking system that is used in sciences. That's SCIE. And in the social sciences, we all know it's SSCI, Social Sciences Citation Index. And then for humanities and liberal arts, so then that's A and HCI, I'm sorry, Arts and Humanities Citation Index. I've left out one H. There should be A and HCI, Arts and Humanities Citation Index. The next reputable system that is called the indexing system is ESCI, Emerging Sources Citation Index, which means to many people that if your journal is included in ESI, that means if the performance is good enough in a few years' time, it will be included in SSCI, I'm sorry. But of course, the relatively looser standard, more inclusive index is a Scopus. A journal that is ranked as Q1 in Scopus, maybe Q3 in SSCI. So it varies because Scopus is a relatively more inclusive indexing system as compared with SSCI. SSCI is very selective. I'm going to talk about what are those SSCI journals, how many of them are there for us to try our luck with. And then of course, I'm going to look at subscription-based journals versus open access journals. Now, in Asia in particular, I know that the University of Malaya is quite open-minded. Some universities have paid a bulk of money to some publishers for open access publishing, which means if your paper passes the review and gets accepted, you as an author do not have to pay the publishing charges. It's called article publishing charges. Okay, that's APC. But some universities, actually some countries, have discriminations against open access journals. They mistakenly thought the only reputable journals are subscription-based journals. And that's not true, honestly. As an editor, I know almost all international journals have two options. When your paper is accepted, you can choose to be published in a mode that is called subscription-based publishing mode. Or if you have funding, if you want your paper to be downloaded, accessed by whoever that has access to the internet, can download and use for research purposes or whichever purposes you have no control over, then you are interested in paying the publishing fees so that your article is published and everyone else can have access to your work. This is one way of what is called achieving equity, which is the reason why in Western Europe, for example, there's a movement that is urging all institutions to go for open access publishing. This means if you have a research grant by your university, you have to publish your work in open access mode, which means you pay the publishing fees with your research grant, so that all the people who are poor, for example, people who are in third world countries that cannot have the money to subscribe to those prestigious journals, they can have access to the work that you have published when you have paid or when your university has paid the publishing fees. I think the other one that I'm going to talk about is peer review. One of the indexes of what is called reputable journals is whether or not the journal really goes through peer review. If the journal does really have an international editorial board, it really goes through the peer review process, quality assurance is guaranteed through peer review, then that is a reputable journal. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the issue of publishing, international publishing or academic publishing. Who is publishing? I jokingly said, let's gossip our way to academic publishing. Who is publishing, who cannot publish, and who can publish? Now, there are a lot of stories that you hear from people that have different versions about how they get their work published. I would rather recommend that we try our own story. We try submitting our own paper, then we will know what is the real story about how people get their work published in the end. Along the way, there are real successes and failures, as you can imagine. Many of us, including myself, the first publishing experience was a miserable one. To many of us, that was a miserable experience because most of the times, if the rejection was the norm for a very inexperienced author, the author felt disappointed, at least, or severely hurt at most, and self-image was damaged to the worst degree to some of the young authors who didn't want to take the consequence of being rejected. But I would say that that was an experience for almost everyone in the academic arena. There's no discrimination for that particular experience. It was an experience that had been happening to everyone in the academia. So that links to whether you are persistent enough, you are really interested in publishing, or are you interested only in publishing an article for the purposes of promotion only? If you are really, really extrinsically motivated or instrumentally motivated. You said, oh, I must publish 3 articles or 4 articles in order to get promoted from a lecturer to a senior lecturer. After that, I'm happy. I will no longer show any interest in publishing, because that was such a miserable experience for me. That means you will not have any persistence or perseverance in moving forward in academic career. So I tried to talk about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. We are all, including myself, to a certain extent, motivated extrinsically. You know, you have to meet certain standards in order to get promoted. You know, that's more like any profession. You have to meet a particular criterion in order to get promoted. That's fine. But if you're really interested in pursuing an academic career, intrinsic motivation alone is not enough. You have to develop some kind of real interest in academic research and academic publishing. So that's what I call intrinsic motivation. But of course, many people publish because they want to establish their reputation. They want to be respected by their peers. That's called peer esteem. But of course, in some other places, there are financial rewards. For a particular good paper you publish, you will be awarded with a certain amount of money. But in Western countries, there's no such reward. Western countries basically are financially now quite suffering because of various situations. Universities are being privatized as if, or incorporatized. Therefore, the funding that comes from the governments is no longer as good as Asian universities, which is the reason why you see in international university rankings, Asian universities are climbing up very fast in recent years. So many of us who take teaching as a career, basically we publish to make a living. That's something we should not avoid, right? But of course, if we love the job and enjoy being a member of the professional community, we will find some kind of intrinsic motivation to say that maybe not every paper, every year is a successful story, but at least maybe 2 years I get a successful publishing, maybe 3 years I get a successful publishing. That has to be planned well. But high sounding term is we have to make some contribution to knowledge, contribution to the existing literature on this particular topic. There are multiple reasons people publish. For example, my own colleague, Professor Rod Ellis, I believe all of you know who Professor Rod Ellis is, right? He doesn't need any publications. But even if he's retired now, he's still writing and publishing. And actually, he is still very productive. He's still very productive. His new book is coming up soon. You can imagine that, you know, for a person more than 75 years old, he's still interested in writing and publishing. That's basically driven by his intrinsic motivation. So who publish then, or who are the people that really publish? I mean, some people say, because you know, you work in New Zealand, therefore you have chances, more chances of getting published. I work in Malaysia, therefore my chances of publishing are reduced greatly. That is, to a certain extent, may be true. I do not know. But when I was in Singapore, for example, I kept on working and writing and publishing as well. In a way, I think it was very much dependent upon how you as a person would like to pursue that line of insistence, perseverance, and basically not giving up. But of course, if you work at Universiti Malaya and someone is working at a polytechnic, maybe the criterion of entry into the jobs are different. Therefore, the requirements are different. Maybe the push from the institutions, from the faculties, from the departments is also different. Therefore, the degree of drive, the internal drive, as well as the external drive, are different. Therefore, people who are working in better universities publish more because the pressure is more, probably. I do not know. I have no simple answer to that one. But there are experiences that I have heard of that reviewer biases do really exist against certain groups of authors based in certain countries. When the writer, for example, is writing from the USA, but he's writing about Asia, then the reviewer thought, oh, this must be an Asian writer. And then the judgment of that particular manuscript is based on the reviewer's misreading of who the authors are, instead of reading what the quality of the paper is. There are instances of this that happened, right? But then, of course, we all talk about native and non-native English-speaking writers. To me, native writers or non-native English-speaking writers do not distinguish so much in terms of academic writing. Some non-native speaker writers may not be speaking the way that the native English speaker does, but they write even better than native speakers. One example that I can immediately give you is Professor Suresh Kanagaraja. Those of you who are interested in reading about academic literacies, in identity, in academic writing across disciplinary areas, etc., must have read Professor Suresh Kanagaraja's work, right? Suresh comes from Sri Lanka, and obviously English is not his first language. But he is one of the very few, very prolific English authors in our field. So that native or non-native speaker divide does not really 100% apply when we talk about academic publishing. It's not exactly the same. But of course, we do have native speaker writers like Ken Hyland, who is extremely productive, Professor Ken Hyland, okay. The other one that I would like to talk about is co-authorship versus sole authorship. There are pros and cons, but you will see from my publishing list that co-authorship is a way of building connections with your students, with your colleagues, with the friends around the world, as well as reaching out to a larger audience. When you co-publish, you will have more papers than just sole authored papers. Because we know that a single person's energy is limited. But if you have a group of authors who work together, and today, for example, someone is leading the paper, another day, another one is leading the paper, and another week, somebody else is leading the paper, but working on the same project. So in the end, you will have 3 or 4 papers a year, or maybe several papers, more than 3 or 4, when you work together, making use of each other's resources and making use of each other's strength in producing the research articles that you all want to co-author. So where can we find our research ideas? In my personal experience as an author, I always feel that research comes from our classrooms because we are applied linguists, right? We are not theoretical linguists. Unless you are a theoretical linguist, then you have to look at the linguistic issues, maybe by looking at the text, or maybe going to the field to do observation. But as applied linguist, I always thought, and I still think, that the classroom is really where our data come from. So we have to look at the teaching research nexus, how these two are connected, how these two can feed into each other, serving the purpose of helping each other. Teaching is informed by your research practices, and your research is helping the teaching, but teaching again provides ideas for you to do further research on. The reason I'm talking about the teaching research nexus is because of the popular discussion about the scholarship of teaching and learning that started at the Stanford University. Of course, this was quite a common discussion now, but some years ago, when in 2012, when Stanford University talked about the undergraduate education in Stanford University, they were talking about the importance of the scholarship of teaching and learning. In their definition, the scholarship of teaching and learning refers to the fact that the teachers want to improve, and the faculty members in American English. Faculty means faculty members. That means staff members in British English. Faculty need reliable information about how well students are learning in their classes. They also benefit from opportunities to collaborate and to learn from professional colleagues. So that's what they define as the scholarship of teaching and learning. When you investigate your teaching, when you investigate your student learning, then you will become a better teacher, in other words. So that exactly provides the field from which we can really collect our data for analysis and finally write up to publish in some reputable journals. Okay, so in Schumann's term, that was an article that that she talked about. Ultimately, investigative work in the teaching and learning will not be an intriguing aside. It's not an add-on, but it is an essential facet of good teaching. When you investigate your own teaching and learning or student learning, you are actually building what you have found into the expected repertoire of a scholarly practice. So that's the reason why I said classrooms are the best field from which we can collect our data and do the analysis in order to get our work published in reputable journals. So the scholarship of teaching and learning is an approach to college and university teaching that views classrooms and other learning spaces as sites for inquiry, innovation, and knowledge building. This is exactly the key idea about why we are talking about applied linguistics research. Applied linguistic research is not only about how language is used in society, but rather it also includes how language is learned and taught in a real venue where learning and teaching happen. Okay, so anchored in inquiry or in inquiry and engagement, the scholarship of teaching and learning reconceptualizes teaching as an ongoing and a scholarly process with an emphasis on improving student learning. It treats teaching as a form of inquiry into student learning. Now, I like this idea. Teaching is a form of inquiry into student learning. That's the reason why you have to do research in the classroom. Now, let me move on to the fundamental considerations in selecting journals. Where and how? My personal, professional experience as an author, reviewer, and editor. Where do you want to publish? I mean, this is, I know that in Malaysia, particularly in University of Malaya, I think the inspiration for all the academics to publish articles in SSCI journals. And of course, that's the best venue we should have our paper published in, yeah, because the better the journal, the more readers the article attracts. But again, that is on the premise that those journals are subscribed to by those institutions. Third world countries, particularly those countries are really deprived of those benefits. Academic scholars will not be able to access those top journal articles because they are by subscription only. Those institutions do not have subscriptions to those journals. Therefore, even if you publish it in a very good journal, you know, poor countries where institutions have no money to subscribe to those journals, scholars will not be able to read your article in full. They may be able to read your abstract. And some authors, not authors, some academics might be daring enough to write an email to you to request a copy of your article. I do really receive such requests quite regularly, but some academic scholars may not be daring enough to ask you for a copy. Okay, so there is a very strong variation in terms of personality-driven interest among those colleagues who work in economy-deprived situations, right? So the key questions include, for example, your motivation to publish your work, what the purpose of your research is, and what your research focus is, and whom you want to be the readership, and what you are writing about, and to which journal you are thinking of writing your paper. and many other considerations. Those considerations are personal decisions. You know, more than 10 years ago, I didn't really take into consideration of what is called SSEI. Because in Singapore at that time, we didn't implement a ranking system. We didn't implement an assessment mechanism that was based on SSEI. By the time I left, the institution started looking at the journal rankings. So, and before that period of time, I chose journals that I thought in my mind were good journals. I didn't really consider whether the journal was listed in SSEI or ANHCI or SCI. I didn't consider that as a criterion at all. But when I started communicating with many of my Asian colleagues, and also because of NIE starting to implement the journal ranking system, I gradually moved away from my original thinking that any journal that I thought was a good journal was the one that should aim at for a particular publication. But now I'm looking at the journals and see whether the journals are included in SCI or SSCI, because that's how the reputation of the journal comes along. So if you are really thinking, I think what you need to consider is really the ideas. A lot of times, many young colleagues always ask me, where did you get the ideas? I said, if you read more articles, current journal articles, you will get a lot of new ideas. Some of those new ideas may not be totally new. And some of those ideas can be replicated in Malaysia, for example. So some of those ideas can be modified and tailored to suit the Malaysian context. Then you can do your research on that particular idea. But of course, the second issue is really whether the topic is current, the currency of the topic. How do I know the topic that I'm looking at is current or not? As I said, again, you have to really keep up with what is happening in the academic world. You must read good journals. At least you have to read the abstract of those articles that you are interested in, published in those top journals, particularly. When you have those ideas, then there will be some critical moments. Those critical moments would be the moments when you would be having the inspiration to quickly draw down some ideas to formulate into smaller paragraphs. And that would be preparing you for your article quite effectively. At least that's what happened to me. And when you got those ideas, when you got the data, when you got the way to analyze, and then that's the time that you have to really think about how your study can be theoretically framed. You know, an issue is investigated. You found the results, but how those results are interpreted depends very much on how you understand the issue theoretically. Therefore, theoretical framing is an attempt by the author to lift up the quality of your thinking that is expressed in that particular article, right? So you have to think about which theoretical view that is really relevant, how I should look at the phenomena that I investigated. So that is called theoretical framing. But of course, more importantly, I think, of course, theoretical framing is important, but more importantly is the issue about your methodology. If you submit a paper to a journal, most of the times your reviewers are looking at your paper and then they are looking at your methodology. Is your methodology reasonable? Is your methodology scientific? Is your methodology logical? Well thought out, well executed, well planned and executed? It means if your research was not carried out logically, then that would be a defeat, immediate failure. You know, the reviewers would be thinking that this paper was wrongly conceptualized. And then the last point is when you are writing about your research conducted in Malaysia, when you write it, you have to think about your international relevance. And at least you have to talk about the implications of your study for other places, particularly those places that have some similarity, share some similar context, similar situations, for example. You have to make a few links, at least a few sentences to say that the findings might have implications for contexts that share similar features as was described in this particular study. And if you make that idea clear, most of the times, reviewers will be thinking that your study is deserving a place in an international journal. Otherwise, they will be saying, if your research is only about Malaysia, why don't you want to publish in Malaysian journal? So there is no need for you to go for an international journal, right? So that would be an easy comment and critique from many reviewers when you start submitting your manuscript to some journals. In order to, as an author, I share my experience. If you really want to have a good range of articles in a 5-year time frame, you have to plan ahead. You cannot think about one article, conduct the research, analyze the research, write it up, submitting it, then you start thinking about another article. That means you will not be able to produce more than a paper a year. The maximum will be just 1 paper per year, because the turnout rate is rather slow. If you submit your paper to a subscription-only journal, the process is quite long. You know, I've got a paper with computer-assisted language learning submitted in 2019, and I still haven't got any decision from the editor yet. I revised 4 times, and I'm still waiting for the reviewers' comments for the next round, but I haven't got the results yet. It's more than 2 years. So if you don't have the time to really waste and wait and wait, you are waiting for the results that are going to be used for supporting your application to a senior lecturer, to an associate professor, then that is not a good strategy. You have to do what I call multitasking. What do I mean by multitasking? You have to at least get 2 manuscripts in preparation, you know, or 3, preferably, if you can, but not only just 1. 1 is not enough, unless you have a very substantially strong, superb quality paper that is going to become a very well citable paper. That's a different story. If we are looking at just ordinary publications for meeting the quantum requirement in order to get promoted, then you have to think about multitasking. Okay. When you have those 2 or 3 papers in preparation, you will have a lot of opportunities to see publications that you have encountered in along the way. When you're reading one day on the internet, you search, then you found an article. You download, save it into a particular folder. That folder has all the relevant articles to that particular paper you are preparing. So on my desktop computer, I've got a folder. Not only just 1 folder, 1 article is 1 folder. In that folder, I placed all the relevant articles into that folder, so that I know those articles are the ones that I've read and they are going to be useful when I'm going to write the paper up. Okay, so when you have those ideas, you can visit those ideas, and maybe new ideas emerge and you can add the new ideas into the existing ideas. That's how your paper is going to become maturer. Then maybe one of the days you think, this is the time that I think I'm ready to really write it up. Then you can focus on writing. So that's what happened to me. Okay, that's my strategy of being productive, by the way. And that's the time you're going to submit to a journal or to edit the book. But as I said, if it's in a subscription-only journal, many journals are very slow. At System, we are trying to get a paper published as soon as possible. But even so, the quickest turnout is about 6 months for a paper from submission to final publishing. But that's really the quick speed that not many other journals have witnessed so far. The reason is that we have 5 editors. So Elsevier, we bargained with Elsevier, and Elsevier is willing to give us more editor roles. So we've got 4 editors and another associate editor that is trained to become an editor one of the days. So in fact, we have 6 editors managing the submissions. So that's the reason why system is relatively fast. But not all other journals are as fast as the system. If you look at some of those journals that I'm going to show you the front page, you will see the time of submission and the time of publishing. So you will see how many months or years the paper went through before it was published. So when you get ready for submission, select the journal that best matches the topic. Do not submit your paper to a journal that doesn't fit at all. Look at the journal, read the description on the internet, then you will know whether your paper is a suitable candidate for that particular journal. Okay, and then if you really want to go, by the way, when your paper is up, try to get your friend to read it, get some ideas, comments, and then proofreading is important before submission in case you will be rejected because of too many typographic errors, grammatical slips, which is not what you should do. If you have too many grammatical mistakes and you submit it, that is not what you do. And most of the journals require a title page. A title page is the place where you can provide your title of the journal, authors, institutional affiliations, and a brief biography. And that biography is important. And currently, I don't know how many of you have a free account in ORCID, ORCID. That's the free academic scholars repository where you can subscribe. Really, it's a free registration. You can have an account, and every article you have published with a DOI will be automatically collected in that account. So it's a very time-saving way of collecting publications, and people will search and find you and possibly will cite you. So do that. I strongly urge you to do that. And so that when you have the chance to write on a paper, to prepare a title page, in that title page, try to include your ORCID link. Then the editor might want to have a look and see whether this is an author that has published before or is really a total green hand. And of course, most editors do not make a judgment on whether you are an experienced author or a green hand. But to me, when I read someone who has published a lot, I will know that the author is an experienced author, and he or she may have put some new ideas into this paper. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to submit it. So that's the way I'm looking at ORCID information. So this is a very familiar routine, but I just want to go through quickly, given that my time is already running out. Developing a writing plan, looking for journals, and then acknowledgement section is important. The referee recommendations, most often you will see some journals that you are trying your luck with would have multiple options, but there are no journals that I know of would accept your paper as is. Because if the paper is sent out for review, reviewers will definitely have a different view from yours. Therefore, they will make recommendations for revision. So most often it will be minor revisions or major revisions or straightaway rejections. If the paper is not suitable to that particular journal, the editor can directly desk reject the submission. But if 2 reviewers both recommend major revisions, particularly if the methodology is critique, probably the editor would reject your paper. Okay, so that happens to my journal system, for example. But there are minor revisions. If you have 2 reviewers that both offer minor revisions, you are really lucky. That's the best solution and outcome that you will find. So in order to publish, I always ask people to read the journals, read those journals where you are thinking of sending your paper to. Okay, you have to. Reasons are many, because these are the journals you are going to send your paper to. Your paper should be more or less related to what the journal publishes. Two, you want to know whether some articles of a similar nature have been published in this journal before. If they have been published and they are relevant and your paper is different from theirs, you might want to cite them to show that you are a reader of that particular journal, so that your paper is made relevant to that journal, right? So again, those are issues that I don't have the time to elaborate on, but my general recommendation is you should read these journals to which you are going to submit your paper. The review process, as I said, could vary for some journals, but most journals would have those 4 options. Okay, if you got the chance to revise and resubmit, please take this chance really seriously and value it, because not many authors are given the chance to revise and resubmit. If you are given the chance to revise and resubmit, do the job diligently to make sure that you have addressed all the concerns. In cases where you disagree to the reviewer, please say politely that this is what I intended. Therefore, I thought that this would be the point that I didn't want to really make any revisions with, because my purpose of this paper was something else, and your recommendation is probably useful for another paper that I'm working on. Okay, so in selecting criteria, in selecting a manuscript, the criteria include, as an author, I always experience this kind of sometimes successes, sometimes failures, by the way. But as a reviewer, I always look at the paper in terms of those criteria. And editors definitely will look at these criteria. 1, the fitness. Does it fit? If it does not fit, rejection is straight away. 2, and this is the most important consideration, the significance of the study and also the relevance of your paper to the journal. 3, clear conceptual framework. Does your paper connect your research to the relevant theories, relevant concepts, relevant constructs in the literature? And of course, as I said, methodology is also very seriously considered by reviewers and also by editors. And of course, when you have the research questions, they are looking at whether your research questions are really appropriate. Are these silly research questions? Are they really meaningful research questions? Okay. Most often, the adequate description of methods, including data collection and analysis, the rigor of methods, and findings and conclusions, or literature review, or anything else, would be very important. You know, when you are presenting the findings, when you're presenting the conclusions, are you presenting the conclusions based on the literature you have reviewed, based on the data analysis you have done, or are you drawing the conclusion purely because you think this should be the conclusion, right? So again, the very important consideration is overall contribution to the field. But of course, if you write well, write cleanly, without grammatical slips, logically connected, that will be contributing to your paper being positively reviewed. Okay, because of my time being really almost over, but let me see that when you are really thinking of a paper, do consider from an author perspective, from a reviewer perspective, also from an editor perspective, justifying your research problem. Is it really interesting? Is it really meaningful? Your review of the literature should be based on the current knowledge, rather than the articles and books published in 1990 or even 2000. That was a long time ago. You know, research must be updated based on what we know about it in the recent years. When you say recent years, that means should have been not longer than 5 years or older than 5 years. If it was older than 5 years, they are no longer recent. They are already quite old. So specifying the purpose of research or determining specific research questions, then the methodology, data collection, analysis, interpreting, reporting, and evaluating how, why this is the thing, this is the case, and then of course, finally, your writing. Writing is an important skill. Even if you can do a research project very well, it does not mean that you have to pay attention to your writing style. One book I believe most of you have probably already seen is very useful by Creswell and Creswell, which is the updated version of the earlier version called Research Design, Qualitative, Quantitative, and Mixed Methods Approaches. Is a very good way of looking at how you can describe your methodology succinctly and logically. Okay, and I will skip these points. We know that some of you in the audience might be thinking that I'm a qualitative researcher. Does that mean that my paper will be rejected? And someone said, I'm a quantitative researcher. Does that mean that my paper will have a higher chance than someone else's paper that is qualitative in orientation? No. The assessment of the papers is based on the quality indexes, not based on preferences of methodology. Qualitative studies have their strengths and weaknesses, and so do quantitative studies. Therefore, as long as you follow the research tradition and write it up clearly, then the paper is a good paper. It's not about whether it's a quantitative or qualitative. Either will be okay. Okay, either will be okay. So, okay, maybe the research process. I'll have a few slides before I finish. You will have, I don't mind giving you more time for questions if you really can stay on. But I think the research process is what we have to understand in order to get our papers published in a good journal, the reputable journal, okay? From design of the study, to review the literature, to build up your methodology and theoretical understanding that can be used for framing your data analysis, interpretation, etc. All these are important steps that we have to consider, either consciously or subconsciously. In my experience as an author, I pay particular attention to my writing of the introduction section, because the introduction section is basically an argument for the significance of your study, for the necessity of why you did this study, right? So that goes back to Swell's move analysis. So he says that if you really want to persuade your reader, you have to establish a research territory, you have to establish a niche, then you have to occupy the niche so that your reader will know that your study is needed and your study is significant. And therefore they are going to keep on reading your paper. Okay, let me show you a few examples, then you will know why I'm talking about those issues. One paper that I published my doctoral graduate, Zhang, who is now an assistant professor at Zhang Agricultural University, which is one of the best universities in China, and Yu Huang, who is also working in China in Wuhan University, which is one of the top 20 universities in China. And we had co-authored papers, not only just one paper, but a few papers. If you look at these two papers, one was published in Assessing Writing. Now, when you see the title of the journal that is called Assessing Writing, then your paper should be focusing on assessing, right? And it should be related to writing. But it can be assessment of writing in many other aspects, not only just assessing of writing in terms of how good the text is, but rather any other aspects that are related to writing. So in this paper, we focused on assessing student writers' self-efficacy beliefs about text revision. So that's about the revision and how their self-efficacy beliefs play out in the whole process of text revision, in the way they look at text revision. And in Yu's paper, this was basically, those papers were based on their doctoral theses, by the way, PhD thesis. And in Yu's paper, we look at how a process genre approach could help improve students' argumentative writing. So that was an intervention study, which is relatively more difficult to do than investigation. You know, intervention, you have to set up an experimental group and a control group to compare the effects of intervention. That was more time consuming and more challenging to carry out, but we successfully wrote up a paper that was published in Reading and Writing Quarterly. This was the paper that was published in last year. The next important point is really in terms of reputable journals. What do we mean by reputable journals? I said at the beginning, reputable journals have nothing to do with whether you're paying or not. Reputable journals are journals that are fully peer-reviewed with an editorial board and that go through the rigorous process of quality assurance. Whether you pay or not is a totally different matter. I'm talking about those journals that are really going through the rigorous review process. I'm not talking about those journals that charge you $50 and publish a paper within a week or two. These are not quality assured journals, I can guarantee you, because you have nobody to do the review within a week. Nobody can do the job. People are busy, and you are not giving them any return in terms of giving them $10 for reviewing the articles, etc., etc. You know, most of the journals do not pay the author, do not pay the reviewers for doing the reviews, right? So you have to look at whether the articles that are going to submit to the journal and whether the journal is really a journal that takes review processes seriously, okay? Most of the articles that you publish in the olden days would be coming with the whole issue, a print copy of the issue in which your article appears, free of charge. That was history. Currently, no publisher, at least the big publisher like Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, you know, Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, they no longer give you a free copy. They give you a digital copy, you know, so that's what is current practice by most publishers. But we can always, as authors, order hard copies with a price, which is not cheap, by the way. It's about $300 per article if you want to buy 50 copies of prints. I normally do not order any off prints. I just need one PDF copy, that's it, okay? So that's one. Let me show you several examples. This is an open access journal, Frontiers in Psychology. And if you can see, this journal is a fee charging journal. This is a article processing charging journal, okay? But it goes through the rigorous review process. The rigorous process is through transparency. It's called consensus-driven publishing. What does that mean? When your paper is submitted to the journal editorial assistant in the editorial office will go through their Turnitin plagiarism check, overlapping check to see whether your paper is plagiarized, whether it's from a paper mill. They will go through. This takes about 2 weeks at least. When the paper is checked and everything is fine, that paper will be assigned to a particular editor. And this is the time that the editor will go through the invitation of reviewers, okay? So for this paper, you will see, by the time the paper is officially published, the publisher requires all people who are involved for the names to be published. If you disagree, then you will not be entitled to edit it. You are not entitled to review it, because they want to show to the readers that this is the process that is transparent. If anything goes wrong, that means all of you are responsible. The editor is responsible, the reviewers are responsible, not only the authors. So the authors, the editor, and the reviewers, three parties are responsible for the academic matters. And the publisher is only providing you with a platform to support the publishing to happen. Now, this is the process. When the paper is submitted, and go through the editorial office to check for plagiarism. When everything is fine, then the editor is assigned. The editor is going to review, to have a quick review and see whether the paper is worthy of being sent out to review. If the editor decides the paper should be sent out for review, then at least 2 reviewers are needed. Now, what happens in the process when one reviewer says, I reviewed one time, I do not want to review anymore. When you send the invitation to the reviewer declined it. Then that means the whole process will start again. The editor will have to have another reviewer to start reviewing the paper, because the process is the requirement that all the reviewers, at least 2, will be agreeing to be listed as the final reviewers. So if you cannot get 2 reviewers in the end that go to the last stage of endorsing the publication, the paper will go around for several weeks or months even, although the publisher is pushing the editor, the reviewer, and authors every 10 days. Then the deadline 10 days for you to quicken up the cycle. Even so, the process is not so fast. Now, if you look at this paper was published on the September the 15th, 2020. But the paper was submitted, if you go to the internet, this is a screenshot, I can't see the data of submission. The paper went through around 10 months, or 6 months, or 7 months, I forgot exactly how many months, but because of the process of reviewing along the way, altogether 4 reviewers were involved, but the 2 reviewers halfway through, they withdrew. That means the editor had to invite new reviewers. So these 2 reviewers were, I remember one reviewer insisted on revision finally supported the publishing. But the other reviewer was a new reviewer that went through the 3rd or 4th reviews. So that's how the paper is published. Okay. But one benefit of open access publishing is the paper is accessible by anyone around the world. You can see that paper has been already downloaded 24,000 times. No paper in a subscription journal will be reaching this number, because people are poor. People cannot access those articles. They do not have money to pay $30 US per paper. That is not possible for many people. I do not want to pay $30 to download a paper by myself, although I have the money. I don't want to spend $30 on a single paper. I don't think it's worth it. I'd rather spend $2,000 for a paper, and then the paper can be downloaded by 24,000 people around the world. Okay, but that's my philosophy. You can have a different philosophy. And this paper was published in July 14th, 2020. That paper was not as much widely read as the other paper, as you can see. Okay, and this is another open access journal. And this journal, to me, is a very reputable journal. I publish it in this journal with my doctoral students, and that this journal does not follow the same procedure as Frontiers in Psychology. This journal is a one-blinded process. That means the reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors do not know who the reviewers are. Even if the paper is revised once, twice, or 3 times and finally gets published, authors never know who the reviewers are. Okay, then the system. If you look at the titles of those articles, you will know what are the popular research topics that system publishes. Okay. Okay. So to conclude my presentation, I have to make a distinction between reputable journals versus predatory journals. Predatory journals are journals that are looking for you for manuscripts. They said, we are very quick, your paper will be reviewed very quickly. Within 2 weeks, your paper will be published. Then they will charge you the money, okay? Reputable journals do not charge you the money. They will go through the review first until your paper is published. Then they will issue you a bill. But predatory journals are different, and they are normally cheap, maybe $100 US, $50 US, $200 US. Reputable journals are not cheap if you are talking about the open access journals. System, for example, is traditionally a subscription-only journal, but it also publishes articles open access if the authors want to publish their articles open access. And the system charges $3,000 US per paper. But the condition is your paper will have to be accepted first. It's not a matter of, let me give you the money and you publish your paper. Nobody will do that. Good journals do not do that. Okay. Let me recommend at least 4 open access journals that are reputable journals that I trust and publish in, okay? But that is on the condition that you have the research funding. If you don't have the research funds, don't consider these journals because they are not cheap journals. If you're thinking of Nature, in sciences, for example, Nature and Science. Nature and Science publish open access articles. Each article is 12,000 or 13,000 US dollars. 12,000 or 13,000 US dollars. But I want to publish in it, but I cannot because my paper is not up to the standard yet. Okay, so you can see that open access does not mean low quality. Open access or non-open access, the journals that you can categorize into one of these categories should be the ones that have go through rigorous quality assured review process. And as long as you trust these journals, they are quality assured with a good impact factor, I think those journals are the ones that we should try, at least, okay? So you can see that open access, Sage Open used to charge $800 per article. Now the price has gone up to $1,200 US because the impact factor has gone up. Frontiers charges $2,950. It's not cheap, by the way. PLOS ONE is the earliest open access journal. The mission statement says that they want to make open science as their mission. Therefore, they charge relatively low open access processing article processing charges. It charges less than $1,000 US, I forgot. But it's a slow process. I got one paper that took 10 months. So I thought open access journals always aim to publish papers as fast as possible, but PLOS ONE didn't meet my expectations. I waited 10 months for a paper to be reviewed and finally published. It was very similar to a subscription journal. It is a blind review process, and it is a very long process in my experience. Maybe some other people have different experiences, but it's a very slow process. I said I will not submit my paper to PLOS ONE anymore because I have to pay at the same time to wait for so long. Sustainability having an impact of 2.567 and site score 3.5 is very fast. Among these 4 journals, sustainability is the fastest journal that I have ever experienced. One of my papers was published within 40 days. The review process was very fast. Within 20 days, 2 reviewers' reports came, and then you were asked to do the revision, and you had to complete the revision within 7 days. If you couldn't finish the revision within 7 days, you can request an extension, but another 7 days will be given to you. But you can request another 7 days if you really can't finish the revision. But at least we did a very quick job, and we revised 1 round, and the reviewers made further recommendations, but major revisions no longer offered. Therefore, we did the 2nd round of revision quickly, and the paper was accepted by the editor within 40 days. So that one is also a very quick journal, quality assured, but success rate is not very high. About 54% of the papers were rejected by the editorial office. So the success rate was around 46%. So you have to try your own luck. Then you will know whether the journal is really the journal that you want to submit your paper to. But the charge, the publishing charge is 1,800 Swiss franc. So you have to look at the price as well. It's not as affordable as a Sage Open. Sage Open is 1,200, but this one is 1,200, but this one is 1,800 Swiss francs. That is around 1,000, probably 1,700 US dollars. Okay. So there are many journals. They are reputable journals. It's really about your personal taste and your institutional expectations. Whichever journal you publish, I wish you good luck, but the very criterion is quality assurance, And if you go to the website of those leading publishers, you will see all the journals that you think would be suitable for you. And before I move on, I think I have to look at a 3-year research publication plan, but my journal, I forgot to introduce you to my journal, okay, our journal. System, this is how system looks like. If you have good paper, please do consider system as one of the venues for possible publication. And those are the people that are located around the world, in Australia, in London, in Texas, in Aberdeen in the UK, in Australia, and also in New Zealand. But there's another editor who used to be in Hong Kong, but she is now in University of Tasmania. So we have people around the world to be the editors on this journal. I have forgotten to list the associate editor, Professor Yongyan Zheng, who is based in Shanghai in China. So we do really welcome these types of manuscripts, and the research articles should be cutting-edge research on application of educational technology and also applied linguistics to solving problems of foreign language teaching and learning. It means any foreign language. Malay as a foreign language, Arabic as a foreign language, Japanese as a foreign language, English as a foreign language, Chinese as a foreign language, French as a foreign language, Spanish as a foreign language, whichever foreign language that we are talking about. So full-length research articles, syntheses and meta-analytical reviews, as well as book reviews. And this is the flow. I'll have a quick look for you, then I'll stop. Okay, so it's roughly the same as I talked about on one of the earlier slides that I've showed you before. And this is a list of social media attention of articles. You can see which other articles are more popular than other articles. Okay, so if you really are thinking of submitting a paper, please do. And if you go to Google and search system journal, and this paper's website will appear. And there's a editorialmanager.com for system that you can register for a free account, and that's where you're going to submit your paper in. So that's all. Thank you very much. Let me stop my screen.
Thank you so much, Prof. Zhang, for
I
the
took
wonderful
more than an hour, sorry.
It's okay, you've gained a lot. And now I would like to open for the Q&A session. So if
Yes,
you have
please.
any question, you can raise your hand, okay? And I will invite you. Perhaps you can introduce yourself and ask the question. So any question, anyone?
Any questions?
Okay,
I know that we agents don't always ask questions, but do feel free to ask.
Okay, we have one question here from Sean Uy. Okay.
Hello, my name is Sean. I'm a PhD student as well as a lecturer in Wawasan Open University, Penang. I'm just asking whether when we submit an article for publication, what's a reasonable wait time? Because we can only submit one article to one journal at a time, and sometimes it takes very long to hear from them. So what's a reasonable wait time?
Yes, that's a good question. Most journals promise that for the first decision, that means from submission to the first round of decision, they promise that it's about 3 months. So 3 months is most often the norm. And, you know, as an Asian editor, I'm more hardworking than European editors, as you can imagine. So the manuscripts that I process are normally given a decision within 3 months, not longer than 3 months. And this morning I checked the system editorial system, and I found one paper from submission to my final decision was within 3 months. That means after revision, 2 rounds of revision, that means the authors were also very efficient. They were very quick. You know, when the reviewers submit the revision recommendations, they took on board the revision recommendations, they did the revision and submit the revised manuscript, and I immediately sent out for the reviewers to re-review, and the reviewers re-review the revised manuscript and submit the recommendations for another round of minor revision, and the authors quickly did the revision and resubmitted it. So that was very rare, but at least I personally experienced a paper that was completed for an acceptance within a 3-month period. So that's what experienced in this particular case. But most journals would be having a longer period of time. If your paper for the first round is with the editor for more than 3 months, you might want to write a polite email to make an inquiry to the editor to say that, you know, my manuscript has been with the journal for more than 3 months. Could you please give me an update on the status of this paper? But most often, it's not because the editors have forgotten about your paper. It's because the reviewers are either difficult to find, or the reviewers have accepted the invitations to review, but they delayed the submission of the reviewer reports. So the editor cannot move forward because of the reviewers not submitting their reviews. So if that's the case, you can wait. Last year, I got a paper that was with one good journal for 8 months. You can't believe it, for 8 months. And then finally, the editor said she now got all the reviewer reports and she rejected my paper. So that happened to me. And if that happened for me, particularly for my doctoral students, they are eager to have a paper in order to look for jobs. I said, if you have already been with me and I tried my best in helping you to revise and, you know, do whatever I would be able to do to support your publication, but in the end, the paper is rejected. You cannot afford another 8 months. Because if you wait another 8 months, by the time the paper is published, maybe in the review process, some other people have already done similar work. Then your paper becomes old-fashioned, no longer new anymore. It's very hard to get published anymore. I said, one solution to this dilemma is to look for a journal that is reputable, good, but quick in getting the paper published. So I decided to send it to Frontiers in Psychology. And the student already got a research grant. So she had the money to finance the publishing of this paper. So we submitted it to Frontiers in Psychology. But this paper didn't take a short time, by the way. It was edited by an American professor. You know, Americans, I'm not saying Americans are lazy, but I'm saying Americans have a normal tempo, different from Asian editors who are really quick. And this editor was slow. The reviewers, each time we could see the reviewers' reports were ready, but the editor didn't take action. The reviewers' reports were in the system for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the editorial office reminded the editor to take action, but he didn't. And finally took action, but then because of review recommendations, we had to revise and resubmit, and the paper was sent to the reviewers to re-review. And the reviewers re-reviewed the paper. And then when the reviewer reports were submitted, the editor had to take action, but he didn't take action. So in the end, I think the paper took about 6 months before it was finally published. Although it was a paper that was called open access, which means you have to pay for the publishing fee. It took 6 months to get published, but at least it was faster than other journals that you never know whether your paper will be accepted. Maybe the first round you have to wait another 6 months, but then the paper is rejected again, right? So that was one solution to the dilemma that my student faced. So to cut it short, I think the normal range of from submission to first decision should be, you know, the logical framework should be about 3 months, but it varies tremendously. Some journal editors cannot find reviewers. The reviewers decline, particularly during the past 2 years when the pandemic has affected all of us. Working tempo has been changed. People's working environment has also been changed. It's not as good as it used to be. So the speed of review is slowed down tremendously. So that's the answer to you.
Okay, a follow-up question, Prof. Zhang. If after, let's say, 6 months, if given 3 months plus another 3 months, and there's still no reply from it, is it reasonable to write and ask, can I withdraw my paper and submit to another journal?
You can. You can write an email to the editor to say, since I haven't got any response from your journal, I've decided to withdraw. Withdrawal is a totally legitimate and professionally ethical decision. You can withdraw. Yeah, but you are not allowed to submit your paper to another journal while your paper is under review with the previous journal. You can submit it at the same time you can withdraw. Let's say you are submitting now, and after submitting, you write a withdrawal letter to the editor to say that I decide to withdraw. Please, you know, abandon any attempt in doing the reviews because I realize that it's too much a long period of time for me to wait. Or you can write a withdrawal request first before you submit it to another journal. It doesn't really make a great difference if you do it on the same day.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
All right, any more questions? All right, we have another question from Safura. Safura, would you like to introduce yourself and ask questions?
Okay. Hello, Professor, and hello, everyone. My name is Safura, and I'm a postgraduate student at Universiti Malaya. So I have 2 questions for you, Professor. The first one is, do you have any advice for postgraduate student writers like me, maybe mistakes that you have observed from the publication submissions that you have received, maybe? And then do you have advice on how I can maximize the number of papers that I can get from my thesis?
Oh, good question. That's a big question, but it's a really good question. I think a thesis, you know, if you are a good thinker, you wouldn't be able to publish your whole thesis in one article. You might want to divide your thesis into several papers. You know, maybe if you are thinking that, oh, my lit review is a very solid lit review chapter, you might be thinking of writing up a paper purely based on the lit review. So it's a review paper. You know, as I said in one of the slides, many journals do really consider systematic reviews. Systematic reviews, meta-analytic reviews, whichever kinds of review that you do very nicely, organized very logically, will be making a separate independent paper. That's one. The other solution to solving the whole big thesis being one piece of research is to look at your research questions. If you have 3 research questions, maybe 3 of the research questions can be merged into 2. If they are not really significantly 3 research questions, maybe when you put them together into 2 major research questions, each research question can be a driving research question that lead you to write up your thesis into one paper. So you will have 2 other papers. So altogether, you have 3 papers. 1 based on lit review. The other 2 will be based on 2 research questions. That's one strategy that I always use. My doctoral thesis, I wrote and published 1 paper based on my lit review. That paper is published in RELC journal, the Rilke journal. That was published in 2000, I think 2001 or 2000, I forgot, 2000. And another paper was more like a reflective journal paper, but not really based on data, by the way. I published in English Today, Cambridge University Press at that time. I didn't know much about international publishing, but I thought, hey, this is a journal. I read some interesting articles that were about 5,000 or 6,000 words long. I said I could manage it. So I wrote a paper based on what I read about that particular topic and got published. The third paper was based on my qualitative data of the thesis, based on my interview of 10 students in the semi-structured interview guide, using the semi-structured interview guide. And that paper was published in Language Awareness, which is an SSCI journal. I mean, I didn't know anything about SSCI at the time. You know, 20 years ago, I didn't know anything about what is SSCI. So it turned out that those journals are now all SSCI. RELC journal was listed into SSCI index from last year onwards. And previously RELC journal was not SSCI, but we all know that RELC journal has a long history. It has been a long established, well-trusted journal, which is the reason why I sent my paper to that journal. I was feeling very happy when the paper was accepted after 1 round of revision. So that was how I strategically divided my thesis into 3 relatively simple papers. But one last paper that was based on expansion of data collection again, but the original ideas were based on my PhD thesis, was published in TESOL Quarterly in 2010, 10 years later. And that was, again, a qualitative paper, but it was a very long paper, more than 10,000 words. So altogether, based on my PhD thesis, I got 4 papers. Of course, because of the time and duration and time lag, 10 years later, I recollected some new data framed within the theoretical framework and got published in TESOL Quarterly. So that's a strategy. I hope this strategy will be useful to you as well.
Thank you so much, Professor.
All right, any more questions from the participants? Okay, we have another question from
Yes.
Kim Pat Wee. Would you like to
Thank
ask
you
the
very
question?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Zhang, for the interesting talk. I joined your talk a bit late, so I'm not sure whether you spoke on special issues. Could you mention something about special issues in system? Because I understand TESOL Quarterly has got a number of special issues which are very interesting. That's my question. Thank you.
Good question. I didn't really talk about the special issues, but system does really have special issues. Special issue proposals are submitted by proposed authors themselves without being invited. They initiated the ideas, then we ask them to formulate their proposal and see why they needed such a special issue. So they have provide a proposal. That means they have to justify why there is a need. Then they will have to provide a list of possible names that they think would be possibly contributing to this special issue. And of course, after the proposal is reviewed by the editors ourselves, 6 of us, we offer comments, recommendations for expanding or refocusing if the focus is not really aligned well with aims and objectives of our journal. And then most of the proposed authors of the special issues do take our recommendations and revise their proposal and resubmit. And finally, they got accepted by us. And then, of course, this is the time they have to decide whether they want to have an open call for papers, or they have already predetermined who they are going to invite to be contributors. So most journals have this kind of practice. So when the special issue is proposed, most likely the proposal authors have already got a list of authors. At least they have got some authors, but not a complete list of authors. But they do, most special issues do have an open call for contributions. Some people go into the contributions, some do not succeed. For example, I co-authored a paper with my PhD graduate in a recent issue, a special issue in system on classroom-based assessment, teacher assessment literacy. It's called Teacher Assessment Literacy, co-edited by Professor Hussein Nasaji at Victoria University in Canada, and also another Canadian university, I forgot the name of the university, Ashid, somebody, I forgot his name. Yeah, but both of them are good scholars, and they sent a proposal to us. We reviewed the proposals, and they started the open call. And I asked my doctoral graduate, are you interested? And she said she was interested. So we sent an abstract, and they accepted the abstract. Then we developed into a full paper, and then submitted it after 2 rounds of revisions, and it was accepted. So that was one experience I had with system. Because at system, we as an editorial team have decided that as editors, we should not publish more than 1 paper per year as an author. And although the paper is led by my PhD graduate, I'm a co-author. That means I cannot publish another paper in the same year. I have to wait for another year. But Hussein Asaji's special issue was planned for 2022, but unexpectedly, Elsevier as a publisher has the policy of having an accepted paper immediately made available online. So because of that, I had a paper in 2021 again, because previously I had already got a paper in 2021, but that was not my deliberate purpose, but rather because of the policy change by the publisher, and the paper that was scheduled for 2022 was made available in 2021. So in that sense, I got 2 papers in 2021 in system, which is unusual. And I have to explain to other editors that the paper that was published recently was scheduled for 2022, but it made available electronically online in 2021. So I hope I have answered your question. Basically, most of the journals have a special issue, not only just 1 special issue. TESOL Quarterly has at least one special issue per year, but the system has multiple special issues per year. At least 2 special issues per year we have, because system publishes 8 issues per year, different from TESOL Quarterly that publishes only 4 issues per year. We publish 8 issues per year, and system has already got rid of print publishing. So there's no restriction on the page range, whereas TESOL Quarterly is still following the conventional publishing mode as a flagship journal of the association that has the obligation to distribute to some members. If members have paid for the print copy of the journal, then you have to give a copy to the authors and editorial board members, as well as those people who have subscribed to the journal. Therefore, the page range is strictly managed, but system doesn't restrict the page range anymore, which is the reason why we have 2 special issues per year, and the system has 2 special issues per year. TESOL Quarterly has only 1 that is dedicated to a particular theme. Yeah, I hope I have answered your questions.
Thank you very much, Prof.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Prof. Zhang. Okay. And thank you, participants, for all your questions. I think we have reached to the end of this workshop. So before we end, perhaps can we take a picture? Let's have a photo session where you can switch on, turn on your camera, please, everyone.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Let me screenshot the first screen. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Right, and then next screen. All right, 1, 2, 3. And then the last screen. All right. Okay, done. So thank you again, Prof. Zhang, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. We have definitely learned a lot from this workshop. And to all the participants, thank you for joining us today. So for those of you who asked about the recording, I think we will try to upload into YouTube, right? Faculty of Education, University of Malaya, so you can access the recording of this workshop. So I think that's all for today. So everyone, again, thank you. And please take care wherever you are. Please stay safe. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. We'll keep in
you.
touch, Prof.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you, Doctor. And thank you, Fadib and Riel. Greeting from Indonesia.
Thank you, Dr. Fatiha.
Thank you, Dr. Adele. So I'm going to share the recording with you later.
Yeah, okay. You
Bye.
just email. Bye. Thanks.